Hello guys, I go by the username of GenKaan, and this will be my second video dedicated to budget EDH card that I don't feel get nearly enough representation in the format. The first one was centered around interaction, and it got a lot of positive feedback, but I didn't feel like it matched my vision or my ambition, so I made some adjustments, mainly upgrading my mic, getting a better setup, but I still feel like messing around with the settings is far from done. There's a lot of improvements left to be done with the mic setup, but the audio quality should be night and day. In the future I will also go a lot more scripted and write down my thoughts beforehand. This will be the second video of the series, and it will be focused around threats and bombs, the fun stuff. Your opponents will need answers to these cards, or they will eventually lose. Some of these cards are more of a disruptive nature. Let's get into it. The first card is Blade of Selves, and it's a bit on the expensive side, around €2. Comes out at 2 mana, equips for 4, that's also a bit expensive, but pair this up with the ETB creature. Few of the top cards on EDH Rec are Eternal Witness, Dockside, Baleful Strix, Solemn, Rexage, Sunny T, Avager, Zendikar, Gary of course, Etali, Wood Elves, Imperial Recruiter, Knight of the White Orchard, Kardur even, and you get some really nice value. If you get 1 or 2 triggers with this guy, you will outvalue most decks. Just take Kardur for example, you get constant gold on all creatures, and hopefully you can attack one person without Kardur dying or be able to block it, but once you have that train rolling, everything's golded all the time. A fantastic card. Next up is Fire Shrieker. Not a super strong card on its own, but pair this up with like a dragon from the D&D set, have Toski in play or something unblockable with Toski. You have the Professional Phrasebreaker, Grim Hireling, Drana, Rankle, Keeper of Fables even to get more card advantage, Questing Beast would just be a monster with this one, Sharding Sphinx getting more tokens or Derevi, and you get some really nice value. A lot of creatures pair well with this guy, so just add some evasion, maybe trample, flying and stuff, and you have a lot of value coming out of just one equipment and a creature that is already good and already fits in the deck. Next up is Frixia Processor. Whatever health you pay up front, you simply gain back by blocking. I'd say to pay 4 to 6 health to get some used up tokens. Pair this up with like an Orzhov deck with Intangible Virtue or Teysa Karlov, and you have a ton of value. Also goes into stuff like Broody-Clad in an artifact deck with Unwinding Clock, making a token each turn. If your opponent does not have an answer for this, it will take over the game, because just a 6/6 each turn, usually at lower power levels, again we're talking about lower power levels here, will most likely win you the game. A huge benefit of this card as well is it's resistant to creature board wipes, so if you get hit with a like Wrath of God effect or Toxic Deluge, you can still produce tokens, and also at instant speed. A huge bonus. Next up is Hairless Caretaker. At 4 mana, it does nothing on the first go, it's a 1/1 so it's very vulnerable, but if you get to untap with it, you get a constant flow of reanimation. Reanimating targets like Kokusho, Gonti, or even like a Sakura Tribe Elder, you will get a constant flow of value. If you get 1 more activation with this guy, I'd say you are in the money zone. Next up is Demon of Catastrophes. Great stats, with only one downside, that you have to sacrifice a creature. And in some decks that's not even a big deal. A 6/6 in the air with trample that comes out like turn 3, maybe turn 4, is a super solid clock early game that will have to be answered, because otherwise that would be too much damage and you will just win the game outright. Next up is Fiend of Depravity. Respectable stats, 5 power, flyer at 5, CMC. If you can protect this guy, you will win the game, assuming you're not playing playing against like heavy stacks decks or like a combo deck. Basically one card that will more or less guarantee that you are winning on board. And on top of that, a totally back-breaking card, because no one's keeping anything really around you. You're breaking all the token decks, you're breaking like go wide strategies totally. It's just a fantastic card. Next up is Tenacious Underdog. Basically a creature that's a free sack or discard for stuff like Braids or Jaxes that will return for 2 life and 4 mana and net your card. Surprisingly, resembling Skeleton goes into 5% of decks. I'd say this at least is on par with that and is a late game card advantage piece that you can dump your mana into and also repeatedly sack to get more value from your sack outlets. Next up we have Nightshade Harvester, growing and pinging on land ETB. If you're playing against like at least one green deck, this would be a 3/3 or 4/4 by the time it comes back to you, to your turn. When she hits like 5 or 6 power, she will put in a lot of work, a great blocker and offensive pressure, and also punishing ramping. So 1 damage might not look like a lot, but a 4 mana that deals 10 damage on ETB, of course it's over time, it's not instant, but at budget I think this is a great card, and also an equalizer against green decks at lower power levels. Next up we have a real bomb. Orobis Veil. This one is strange to me. No decks run it, and it's a simply amazing card. It stops equipments, because that's an ability. It stops auras, because that's targeting. It stops a lot of 1/1 counter strategies as well. In a Rakdos deck, it will turn all pingers into killers. Liquid Metal Torque becomes a tap to destroy target creature. Hex Parasite is 2 life, destroy target creature. Grim Hireling becomes 1 black, sacrifice 0 treasures, target creature get -0/-0. That means 1 black, destroy target creature. Don't even have to sacrifice a treasure. This is simply an insane card on top of being a 4/4 flyer for 4 with some of the most amazing art. Next is Lashright. In a heavy black deck, this is a scalable 4/4 for 4 on topping of having the ability to re-equip for 4 life, leaving you a creature that you can sacrifice, making stuff like Voltron or just heavy beaters with evasion like Trample or Flying real threats. Next up is Misery's Shadow, a 2/2 for 2 that shuts down reanimation and it can be pumped late game to go in for lethal. A great 2-drops. It's a bit on the pricier side at like between 1 and 2 euros, but shutting down graveyard recursion is super important in the current meta of EDH, so this one goes into most black decks that's creature focused. Next up we have a free sack outlet in Frixia Processor. Again, sacrificing creatures to get rid of tokens, pairs very well with Orobis as well, can be a problem for a lot of decks. It's a little overcosted at 5 mana for a 4/4, but I think free sack outlets should never be overlooked. Next up is Ravenloft Adventurer. Assuming it's your first step into the Undercity, you will get a 3/4 for 4 mana that comes with a free basic and has Graveyard Hate. That stops some sort of reanimation and graveyard recursion stuff. And even if you don't get it to the point where you have completed the Undercity or a dungeon, it's still a nice card. If you manage to go through a full dungeon, each attack will do a ton of damage. Sadly, the hit counter stuff will not work on tokens because they cease to exist once they stop being on the battlefield, so no extra damage for tokens, but still a great card. Next up is Shakedown Heavy, a great 3-drop that either draws you a card or gets in for damage. Guess most people would take that deal, actually, to get you a card instead of taking 6 damage. As it comes out early game, I doubt all 3 of your opponents will have 2 creatures they're willing to sack or trade with this guy. Next up is Clack Bridge Troll. At 5 mana you get a lot of value. Worst case scenario, you get to draw an extra card each turn while thinning out the board. Best case scenario, you pair this up with like a Massacre Worm or something that removes all the tokens, and you will have an 8/8 attacker at 5 mana with haste. Yeah, this will mostly likely draw your card on ETB, on top of being a great top end. Next up is Endless Whispers. This one I say is a bit more iffy. If you can generate blocker using something that isn't a creature, this is a great card. It's chaotic for sure, and does not give you a win, but sweepers will not solve anything for a combo or control player, so it kinda keeps them on their toes. Of course exile effects will work, but with the sack outlet you can get around that as well. Works fantastic with stuff like Blood Artist, pairing it up with a free sack outlet, and also have a political way of winning as well, giving creatures to players that can attack in for lethal. Next up is Cephalid Facetaker. At 3 mana, this does some real work. Pairing it up with something like a Sun Titan gives this creature a lot of value. Pairs fantastic with a lot of other creatures as well, and it doesn't have to be your own creature. Also with stuff like equipment, this does super great work. You can take the initiative in Monarch whenever you want. So this one I'd say at 3 mana, unblockable. Yeah, this is a great card. Next up is Sky Strike Officer. A very fair card and a great 3-drop that generates blockers and nets you card advantage eventually. I really like this card, both on budget and on like human or soldier tribal. This will do a lot of work. If it comes down turn 3, you will have a good game ahead of you for sure, and advantage. Next up is Stitcher Geralf. A fine blocker on its own that pumps out blockers at instant speed for 3 mana. Milling 12 cards almost guarantees you to hit something. Putting this card in your typical zombie deck will also help out with filling up your own graveyard and getting some big boys. The last card out is Reigns of Power. This one will either save you or take a player out, if not multiple players out. At 4 mana it's reasonably costed and the effect is very lethal. If it's flexible enough to be considered for a future video, I will do focusing on around cards that are flexible, that does more than one thing. And the OTK potential of this card is very high, and also the fact it can save you from getting crushed by a Crater Hoof. There we have it guys. This will cover Artifact Black and Blue. I'm trying to cover around 20 cards per video, so there will be a lot more stuff coming out soon. Remember that these are budget cards, so it does not nearly see enough play, at least based on the amount of power they offer. So comparing these to Staple, I'd say isn't fair. For sure the Staples have higher power, but we're looking here for flavor on a budget. So stay tuned guys, subscribe, and a happy new year to everyone. Much love from GenKaan.